"Hey son, I made your favorite stew." The words landed like a pebble in still water, small but enough to send quiet ripples through him. He was halfway through the careful rhythm they'd shown him. Ladle from the pot, pour into the bowl, pass with a polite nod. The stainless counter was warm under his forearms, steam rising in lazy curls from the soup. The line of people shuffled forward with muted conversation, trays balanced, coats smelling faintly of damp wool. But now he was looking at her. She stood just beyond the counter, hands steady on her tray. A knitted hat covered most of her hair, silver strands escaping to frame a face lined but alert. She wasn't smiling in the broad, camera-friendly way he was used to seeing at these events. Instead, she looked at him like they were mid-conversation, and he'd just forgotten his part. He tried a polite half-smile. "Pardon." "Your favorite," she said again, tilting the tray slightly as if to point at the pot between them. He glanced down at the stew, chunks of carrot and potato, shreds of beef, flecks of herbs moving lazily in the broth. It looked ordinary enough, but there was something in her tone, casual and certain, that made his fingers tighten on the ladle. "My favorite," he repeated. The words tasted strange. The line behind her shifted, a boy coughed into his sleeve, and a volunteer dropped a stack of napkins that scattered in a soft rush across the tile. He heard them hit the floor but didn't look away from her. "Been a while," she said. He thought about correcting her, explaining that she must be mistaking him for someone else. But the impulse faded before it reached his mouth. There was a pause here, an odd stillness, and something about her eyes made him want to stay in it. "Let me serve you some at least," he said. She passed the bowl forward, her fingers brushed his briefly, cool against the warmth of the pot. A faint scent of bay leaf rose with the steam, sharp and familiar in a way that made his breath hitch. He ladled the stew in, careful not to spill, though his hand felt less steady than usual. "Bread?" he asked, reaching for the basket. She nodded once. "Always." He set a slice on her tray, the crust dusted lightly with flour. She gave a small nod, as if they'd just confirmed something between them. "You should taste it," she said. He gave a short laugh. On duty here." "Even so," she replied, already turning toward the tables. She walked with a measured pace, shoulders slightly tucked, making space for others to pass. He handed out another bowl, another slice of bread, but the rhythm had loosened. His PR manager hovered near the door, giving him the occasional glance that meant smile a little more for the cameras. The line thinned. He looked over to where she'd sat, at the end of a long table near the wall, beside a drafty window that framed the gray winter sky. The stool opposite her was empty. The young man serving beside him leaned closer. "We sep got this if you want to take a minute." He hesitated. He didn't usually step away without clearing it first, but the urge came quick and clear, like seeing an open door you didn't know you wanted to walk through. He set the ladle down, stripped off one glove, and crossed the room. She glanced up as he sat. "It's sep's hotter now, best time to taste." The metal stool was cold through his suit trousers. He picked up the spoon, feeling the light weight of it in his hand. Steam rose from the bowl, carrying the mix of herbs and slow-cooked meat. He blew on the first spoonful. The heat reached his lips before the flavor did, then salt, then a low sweetness, then the pepper at the end. His jaw loosened without thinking. "Good?" she asked. "It's sep's." He stopped, frowned slightly. "Better than I expected. You used to say it tasted like home." The word hit differently here, in this drafty shelter with its mismatched chairs and worn linoleum. He didn't answer right away. A small boy passed, his tray tilting dangerously. One carat coin slid off the plate and landed on the floor beside the old woman's shoe. She bent, picked it up with a napkin, and handed it back to him. "Careful there," she said softly. The boy grinned, nodded, and hurried on. The CEO watched the exchange, spoon still in his hand. It was such a small thing, the bent knee, the quick recovery, but it stuck. She returned her gaze to him. "You still run fast." He gave a faint shake of his head. "Different kind of running now." "That sep's harder," she said, sipping her stew. He tried another spoonful, slower this time. The bay leaf floated near the surface, its edge curling slightly. He pressed it down with the back of the spoon, then let it rise again. "Why call me son?" he asked, finally. She didn't blink. Because I know how you looked when you were hungry, and you look like that now. His throat tightened. He couldn't tell if it was the heat of the stew or something else. From the kitchen, a timer beeped, 3 quick notes, and the sound seemed to loosen the moment, just enough for him to breathe again. He set the spoon down carefully, like it might spill more than broth. The old woman kept eating, unhurried, and he sat there realizing this was the first time in months he hadn't been thinking about the next meeting. Are you famous, or just tall? The voice came from somewhere below his line of sight. He looked down to see a girl in a red coat, the hem brushing the tops of her boots. She had dark, quick eyes, and a slightly runny nose, the kind of detail no one tells you before you come to a place like this. Her question hung in the air with the unself-conscious boldness only a child can manage. He blinked. Mostly tall, he said. The old woman chuckled into her stew. She's not wrong to ask, she murmured. The girl shifted her gaze to her. Miss Alma, can I have more salt? Pinch only, Alma said without looking up. Dr. Sepp's orders. The girl's shoulders rose in a tiny shrug. She drifted away, boots squeaking softly on the linoleum, and he was left with the echo of her question. Famous, or just tall? It didn't sound accusatory, more like she was collecting facts about her world. Alma, he said, tasting the name. She glanced up. That's Sepp's me. He waited for her to explain. Instead, she focused on folding her napkin in neat quarters, pressing each crease with the flat of her palm. You knew my mother? The words came out before he decided to speak them. Her eyes warmed slightly. We lived on the same street. She stepped send you over for bread when she worked late. A faint smile. You stepped come back with candy hidden in your socks. Something in his chest shifted. Not recognition exactly, but the feeling of a picture coming into focus from the edges. He couldn't place the details, but the tone of her voice carried a truth that felt heavier than the words themselves. Behind them, a volunteer passed, carrying a crate of apples. Heads up, the man said cheerfully, as the box brushed the CEO's shoulder. The harmless bump sent a small jolt through him, a reminder that this wasn't his carefully spaced office, where people avoided any accidental touch. Alma was watching him. You look like you stir somewhere else. I'm just trying to place you, he admitted. You don't have to, she said, her voice gentle but firm. We can just sit here. That unsettled him more than any direct question. He wasn't used to people letting go of the need to be remembered. He studied her face, tracing the lines near her mouth, the soft curve of her jaw. If she had been in his past, she had been in the kind of moments no one photographs but that somehow stay anyway. The kitchen door swung open, letting in a thin ribbon of cold. The draft slipped under his sleeves, cool against the fine hairs on his forearms. He shivered before he could stop himself. Alma reached across and touched the back of his hand. Still freezing, I see. The contact was brief but certain. He felt the press of her fingers long after she'd pulled them back. You remember a lot, he said quietly. I remember enough, she replied. Enough to know you used to sit in that same way, elbows in, like you were holding on to something only you could see. A child Sepp's voice called out from near the counter. Miss Alma, is there more bread? Alma Sepp's reply was warm, but matter-of-fact. On the tray by the tea. The CEO followed the boy's path with his eyes, a quick skip step, the slight sway of a too-big sweater. The ordinary scene struck him with a quiet weight. He felt his shoulders lower a fraction. You come here often? He asked. Most days, she said. Pots don't mind themselves. He almost smiled. What do they say? Sometimes they hurry, Siddert blowing gently on her spoon. Sometimes they wait tatter. Siddert blow, this one says, Siddert tatter tatter. For a while he did. The room moved around them, the shuffle of trays, the soft splash of water in the sink, but his focus stayed on the slow rhythm of her eating, the unhurried way she existed in the space. The red coat girl reappeared, this time sidling closer to his elbow. You have a shiny watch, she said, her tone part curiosity, part accusation. He turned the watch face down. Not here, he said. Here I septum just tall. The girl seemed to accept that. She pressed a paper salt packet into Alma's hand with a conspiratorial whisper, pinch only. Then she darted away again. He watched her go, feeling a tug of something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the casual trust of children toward the people they believe will stay. When he turned back, Alma was watching him with the same quiet patience she'd shown since he sat down. "You start not rushing," she said. He realized she was right. The ladle, the counter, the cameras near the door, all of it could wait. For the first time in months, he didn't feel late for something. Funny how a smell knows your name before you do. Alma said it while fishing something from her stew. A bay leaf, slick with broth. She laid it on the edge of her napkin, patting it dry like a delicate letter she wanted to keep. He didn't answer right away. The smell had already been working on him, loosening half-formed images, a small kitchen, steam on windows, a spoon tapping gently against a pot. He didn't know if those belonged to her, or just to the memory of comfort. Around them, the shelter had quieted after the lunch rush. Chairs scraped softly, bowls clinked on tabletops, and a kettle clicked on in the kitchen. The hum of the fridge was louder now, a steady presence in the background. His phone buzzed once in his pocket, a short vibration, then another. Reflex twitched through him. His hand nearly went for it, but he stopped, fingers resting on the table instead. He wasn't sure if it was willpower or something heavier keeping him still. "You were like that as a boy," Alma said, not looking at him. "Like what?" "Half here, half somewhere else. Always deciding which mattered more." He almost asked her how she could know that, but he could hear in her voice that it wasn't guesswork. The back door opened with a dull thump, letting in a man in a worn jacket, carrying a crate of celery. Winter air trailed after him, crisp and sharp. "Where you want these?" the man asked. "By the sink," Alma said. She smiled at him, not the quick, polite kind, but something that made the man's shoulders straighten slightly as he carried the crate across the room. The CEO caught the earthy scent of the celery leaves, fresh and damp. It cut through the meat and spice of the stew like a reminder of something green still growing somewhere. "You keep saying you made this for me before," he said. "I did," she replied, matter of fact. "Your mother worked late. I was 2 doors down, she stepped knock, ask if you could sit at my table till she came home." He tried to picture it. Bits of an image came, the sound of a chair leg dragging on a kitchen floor, the glow of a low-hanging lamp. His hands gripping a spoon too big for them. He saw fog on the window, and the urge to draw something in it. The details wouldn't stay long enough to arrange into a clear scene, but the feeling was there, a sense of being kept, of being thought about. "What was her name?" he asked, before thinking it through. Alma Sepp's spoon paused mid-air. "Names can hurt when they land wrong," she said gently. Let the stew do the remembering." He felt both relieved and frustrated. He wanted to ask again, to push. But there was a certain truth in her refusal that kept him still. He took another spoonful. The flavors seemed deeper now, as if the quiet around them had made space for them to show themselves. "What's that sweet note?" he asked. "Parsnip," she said, not enough to brag, just enough to lean on. A small laugh caught in his throat. "You cook like you talk." "Plain," she guessed. "Kind," he corrected. In the corner, a boy was humming under his breath, tapping his shoe against the leg of his chair. The rhythm was off, the tapping faster than the tune, and it made the CEO smile without meaning to. He remembered that impulse to keep something moving even when nothing required it. Alma was watching him again. "Why did you come here today?" "My office said it would be good," he said after a pause. "Good for the company. And now?" she asked. He looked into his bowl, where a chunk of carrot floated beside the bay leaf. "Now I'm hungry," he said. The honesty surprising him, not just for food. Alma set her spoon down, her hand resting beside the bowl. "The trick with stew," she said, "is knowing when to stop stirring. Then you wait, let the heat do the rest." His phone buzzed again, one quick, insistent pulse. His thumb twitched. He pictured his assistant frowning at her desk, the calendar on her screen flashing red blocks of time, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he lifted the bowl and drank the last mouthful directly from it. The heat slipped down into his chest, settling in places he hadn't realized were cold. "Famous or tall?" The voice startled him. The red-coat girl had returned, standing beside the table with her hands buried deep in her pockets. "Maybe both," he said. She grinned. "My brother says the stew tastes like Sundays." Alma Sip's smile was small but bright, Tell your brother Sundays are for seconds. The girl ran off, coat flaring behind her. The CEO sat back, letting the words sink in.
Sundays.
The image that rose was simple: a table that fit too many chairs, a radio with a loose knob, a voice warning him. The pot was hot. He didn't know if it was real or just the stew giving shape to the feeling. Either way, it warmed him. He carried his bowl to the sink and rinsed it under water, warmer than he expected. His fingers tingled as the heat soaked into them. When he turned, Alma was still at the table, sipping her tea, her gaze soft but steady. It was as if she knew something had shifted, not much, just enough to change the direction of the next step. You ever notice, Alma said, rinsing carrots under the deep sink, how people hold bowls like secrets? The water hissed steadily, splashing against orange skin. She kept her hands steady in the stream, turning each carrot slowly, her fingers moving as though the vegetables might bruise. He was stacking trays on the counter, the dull plastic clapping together with each pile. The words hung in the air between them, bowls like secrets. He tried the thought on for size, the way people tilt them toward their bodies, hands curved protectively, shoulders angled as if shielding something fragile. I haven't, he said, and noticed he was speaking softer than usual. That's because you're used to plates, she replied, shutting off the tap. Plates are for showing, bowls are for keeping. She dried her hands on a thin towel, folding the corner over her palm. The motion felt practiced, unhurried. It reminded him of someone who knew how to stretch a task, so it took up just enough time, never more. From the far end of the dining room, a short burst of laughter rose, sharp, quick, then gone. He turned his head toward the sound. At a corner table, a woman and a man were leaning over a battered deck of cards. The man's hands trembled as he gathered them, but the woman's eyes followed his every move with patient amusement. You okay? Alma asked. He looked back at her, just thinking. Careful, she said lightly. Dangerous habit. He leaned against the counter, arms folded. Do you live nearby? Close enough to walk, far enough to wonder if I should. Her answer had edges. Not sharp exactly, more like a doorframe that had been worn smooth, but could still catch you if you weren't careful. He didn't ask her to explain, still his mind turned over the possibilities, fitting pieces into guesses. A boy no older than 6 wandered past, dragging a stuffed rabbit by one ear. The toy's fabric was worn to a soft shine, one leg patched with mismatched cloth. He stopped near the serving counter, craning his neck to see inside the soup pot. Is it all gone? The boy asked. Not yet, Alma said, moving to ladle some into a small container. The boy watched intently, rocking on the balls of his feet. My mom says this stew is better than the store sips. That's because the store can't remember your name, she replied, sealing the lid and handing it to him. He hugged it close to his chest, the lid pressed inward under his grip, a small risk of spilling, but he didn't loosen his hold. He walked away without looking back. The CEO watched him go, eyes tracing the uneven hem of his coat, the way the rabbit's ear brushed the floor. It was such a small detail, but it clung to him. He felt an unexpected heat under his ribs. The kind that wasn't quite sadness, but wasn't far from it. You see, Alma said quietly. See what? How people carry what seps theirs, even when it seps falling apart. He rubbed his thumb over his palm. In his own world, problems were solved by replacing things entirely, upgrading, streamlining, erasing the flaws. Here, people kept what they had, even when it frayed, especially when it frayed. What about you? He asked, before thinking. What are you carrying? Alma Sip's smile was faint but certain. Nothing I can set stir into a pot. From the other side of the room, a tray clattered to the floor, a hollow slap of plastic against tile. He turned to see a man with a limp crouching awkwardly to pick it up. The man's hand shook slightly as he tried to lift it. Without thinking, the CEO crossed the room, bending to steady the tray with one hand and help the man rise with the other. You all right? He asked. Yeah, the man said, brushing it off. Just a leg acting up. The tray was damp underneath, a thin film of water from somewhere on the counter. He carried it back to the shelf, the moisture seeping briefly into his sleeve. It left a faint cool patch that he didn't bother to shake off. Alma glanced at him when he set it down. Not a big look, just enough for him to know she'd seen. Careful, she said, or you still start liking this place. He gave a small, almost smile. Would that be so bad? Depends, she said, returning to her carrots. Some places make you face yourself. The kettle clicked off behind them, the sudden silence after its hum sharp in the ear. A volunteer poured steaming water into a row of mugs, the scent of tea drifting into the air. It mingled with the stew's warmth, making the whole kitchen feel smaller, like someone's home after dinner. He realized, standing there, that he wasn't thinking about his next appointment. The cold patch on his sleeve had warned against his skin. The air smelled faintly of pepper and steam, with the quiet rustle of people finishing meals. It was ordinary, and it was exactly what he hadn't known he was missing. You don't said eat fast anymore, Alma said. He glanced over from where he was lining up clean bowls on the counter. Her tone was casual, but it felt like she'd been watching him long enough to notice something others might miss. I don't eat much at all, he replied before he could dress the truth in something neater. She was wiping down the counter in small even circles. Always rushing, she said. Even when you sit, you set her halfway gone. He wanted to tell her she was wrong. After all, he was here, wasn't he? Standing in this shelter kitchen, sleeves rolled up, doing his part, but even in his own head, the protest sounded thin. The front door opened, letting in a blade of cold air. A man stepped in, stamping his boots twice before heading for the line. The smell of wet wool and outside air mixed with the heavier scent of stew. It made something stir in him, an old winter hallway, a mat soaked with snow, the muffled sound of boots being pulled off in a room he used to know. Alma noticed his gaze shift. Where sept you just go? He hesitated. Back somewhere. Good, she said, moving the cloth to another patch of counter. Good, he echoed. Means there's still something in you worth visiting. Before he could respond, a young voice piped up from across the room. Miss Alma, we set her out of napkins. She nodded toward the shelf, by the far wall, top left. Bring them over, would you? He crossed the room. The stack of napkins was wedged between a jar of sugar and a tin of coffee. On his way back, he caught his reflection in the narrow strip of glass above the serving counter. The light from the overhead fluorescence was unkind, showing the lines at the corners of his mouth, the faint gray at his temples. This wasn't the carefully staged image that appeared in annual reports or lobby photographs. When he handed Alma the napkins, her fingers brushed his. Masks get heavy, she said quietly. He blinked. What makes you think I am wearing one? She didn't answer, just set the napkins down, smoothed the top of the stack, and moved to refill a bread basket. From the kitchen doorway, a young volunteer called out, Sir, we could use you at the tea station if you stir free. The phrase caught in his ear, if you're free. He wasn't sure when he'd last heard it without it, meaning if your calendar allows. He stepped over to the tea table. Steam drifted up from the kettle, curling in slow ribbons. He poured the water into mugs, the heat seeping into his hands, until his fingers loosened against the handles. One of the mugs rattled slightly in its saucer, the ceramic knocking gently like a small, steady heartbeat. As he handed the mugs to waiting hands, he noticed how each person gripped them differently. Some cradled the warmth, others took quick sips like they were afraid it might be taken away. He kept pouring, slow and careful, until the line was gone. When he looked up, Alma was leaning against the counter, her eyes on him. No smile, no frown, just a quiet sort of taking measure. He returned to her side. Why do you keep looking at me like that? Because you look like someone who's waiting for permission, she said. For what? To stop running, she replied. The words slipped past his defenses more easily than they should have. He didn't know if she was right, but the thought made something loosen in his chest. Not relief exactly, but a little more space to breathe. Behind them, a chair scraped the floor as someone stood up too quickly. A fork clattered against the table. The sound was ordinary, but it startled him more than it should have, breaking whatever thin layer of calm he'd been building. Alma didn't flinch. She just reached for the bread basket again. Some noises, she said, you can choose not to carry with you. He nodded, unsure whether she was talking about the clatter or something much older. The tea station was quiet now. The stew simmered gently in the pot, its surface trembling when bubbles rose from beneath. The air smelled of pepper and something faintly sweet. For a moment, he forgot the cameras, forgot the clock, forgot the version of himself he'd brought in here for the sake of appearances. It wasn't a full shedding of the mask, but he could feel the first seam loosening. The first spoonful caught him off guard. He had taken it out of politeness, expecting something decent but forgettable. Instead, the stew's heat unfolded slowly, layer by layer. The soft sweetness of carrot, the earthy depth of beef, a faint bitterness from bay leaf, the clean snap of pepper at the end. It wasn't just taste, it was texture and time. He sat back slightly, letting the spoon hover over the bowl. Steam drifted toward his face, carrying the kind of warmth that made his eyelids heavier without him realizing. The sound of the room dimmed, conversations became murmurs, the scrape of utensils, a distant rhythm. Across from him, Alma ate without fuss. She didn't watch him, didn't push. She let him find whatever was there in the bowl. "You remember now?" she asked, after a moment. "I's not sure if it's Sep's remembering," he said. "Or just feeling something that Sep's been gone a while." "That's what remembering is sometimes," she replied. He took another spoonful, slower this time, letting the flavors linger. Salt met sweetness in a way that made his jaw unclench. It was the kind of balance you couldn't fake with shortcuts. A chair leg squeaked somewhere behind him. He didn't turn. Instead, he focused on the way the stew seemed to settle in his chest, spreading heat outward until it reached his fingertips. "Did you always make it like this?" he asked. "Always," Alma said, "but it tastes different depending on the day you have before it." He didn't understand at first. Then he thought about his morning. A string of emails, a rushed drive, the polite stiffness of cameras at the shelter entrance. Maybe she was right. The same stew could land differently, depending on what weight you brought to the table. A boy passed their table carrying a tray too heavy for him. The tray dipped to one side, and a coin of carrot rolled off the edge, landing on the floor near the old woman's boot. Without hesitation, Alma bent to pick it up, using a napkin to cradle it before tossing it into a small bin. "Careful," she told the boy gently. The boy grinned, sheepish, and hurried on. The CEO found himself watching the small act more than the spill itself. It was ordinary, almost invisible in the churn of the room, but it lodged in him. The bend, the napkin, the return to sitting, a reflex born from years of noticing small things that others stepped over. He returned to his stew. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a memory stirred. A dim kitchen, winter light, slanting through a half-open curtain, a voice telling him to keep his elbows off the table. He couldn't see the face, only the way the words felt. Not sharp, not scolding, just present. He realized his grip on the spoon had loosened. He was holding it the way he might hold a pen when thinking, not a utensil when rushing. "Why call it my favorite?" he asked. "Because you used to eat it like you were trying to finish before someone changed their mind," she said. "And that look Sep's still in you." He almost laughed, but it caught in his throat. "You make me sound starving." "Not for food," Alma said simply. A kettle clicked in the kitchen, followed by the faint, hollow sound of water being poured into mugs. The smell of weak tea drifted over, cutting through the heavier scent of the stew. He inhaled, surprised at how grounding it felt. He took another bite, this one without thinking. The parsnip's sweetness slipped in again, quieter than the pepper but lingering longer. It was the kind of flavor you only noticed if you slowed down. For a moment he imagined what it would be like to eat this without cameras anywhere in the building. To come in from the cold unannounced, sit at a corner table, and eat without anyone expecting a handshake or a statement. The thought landed heavier than he expected. "You look tired," Alma said. "I am," he admitted. She didn't offer sympathy or advice, just kept eating, as though his tiredness was a fact that didn't need to be fixed in the moment. In the lull, the boy with the stuffed rabbit from earlier reappeared, now holding the toy by its patched leg. He stopped beside their table and stared at the CEO's bowl. "Is it good?" the boy asked. The CEO nodded. "Very." The boy leaned in slightly. "It sets better when you eat the carrots last." He blinked at him, surprised by the certainty in the small voice. "Because then it ends sweet," the boy said, and wandered off before the CEO could answer. He looked down at the bowl, noticing how many carrots he'd already eaten without thinking. The advice was oddly compelling. He decided to leave the rest for the end. When he finally set the spoon down, there was still steam curling from the bowl. The bay leaf floated near the rim again, edges curled like it had been keeping a quiet watch the whole time. He glanced at Alma. "Thank you." She met his eyes. "Steady, eat slow next time." The rush had passed. The shelter's clamor thinned to a soft mixture of scraping chairs, low murmurs, and the occasional clink of cutlery against ceramic. The stew pot on the counter still sent up lazy curls of steam, but no one was queuing now. He sat with his empty bowl in front of him, fingertips resting lightly on its rim. The faint ring of broth at the bottom had dried into a darker line, catching the overhead light. Across from him, Alma was holding her tea mug with both hands. The handle was missing, leaving only the curve where it had snapped clean. She cupped it easily, as though the break had simply made it better to hold. Neither of them spoke. It wasn't the tight, awkward quiet of strangers who'd run out of things to say. It was looser, like a worn sweater. A silence that asked nothing from either of them. The steam from her tea drifted upward, catching in a shaft of sunlight that had slipped past the clouds outside. He watched it twist and thin, until it disappeared into the air above their table. "You stir not in a hurry," Alma said at last. "Not right now," he replied. His voice sounded different to his own ears. Lower, slower. "That sep's rare for you?" she asked. He considered pretending otherwise. Instead, he nodded. From somewhere behind him came a muffled sneeze, followed by the rustle of someone fishing in their pocket for a tissue. Alma reached into her own, and passed one to a young boy at the next table without looking away from her tea. The boy mumbled a thanks, and went back to eating. "You always keep tissues on you?" he asked. "Always," she said. "You never know when someone will need one." It was a small detail, but he found himself turning it over in his mind. In his world, every action was weighed for efficiency, measured against a schedule. Here, someone could carry a packet of tissues simply because people needed them. The front door opened briefly, letting in a quick slip of winter air that carried the scent of something metallic, cold railing, maybe, or wet pavement. It brushed the back of his neck before the door swung shut again. "You look like you stir listening," Alma said. "I am," he replied, though he wasn't sure if she meant to the room, to her, or to something else entirely. She took a small sip of her tea, then set the mug down and pushed it slightly away, as if to give the table more space. Sometimes you don't have to fill a space with words, you just have to not leave it empty. He thought about that for a while. The absence of his phone's vibration in his pocket was almost louder than its buzz had been earlier. The quiet pressed in, not uncomfortably, but firmly enough to make him notice how rarely he stayed in it. A fork clattered to the floor at a nearby table. The sound was sharp in the stillness, and he turned instinctively. A teenager bent to pick it up, his cheeks flushing as he straightened. Their eyes met briefly, and the boy gave a small, awkward grin before turning away. The moment was nothing more than that, a dropped fork and a glance, yet it seemed to leave a ripple in the room, a reminder of how easily the ordinary could make itself known. Alma shifted in her seat, easing one shoulder as though shaking off a stiffness. "You've got a lot in your head," she said. "Always," he admitted. "Let some of it sit for a while," she said. "Not everything needs moving at once." He didn't answer right away. The truth of it felt too direct, like sunlight through bare branches, impossible to ignore, but not blinding. A small cough came from across the room. One of the volunteers set down a tray of mugs and began refilling them with hot tea, the liquid splashing gently against the ceramic. The scent drifted toward their table again, curling around the lingering aroma of stew. He realized that he could hear his own breathing, slow and even. It wasn't something he noticed often. "You've been here before, haven't you?" she asked. He hesitated. "Not like this." Her gaze stayed on him, steady but without weight. "Then maybe it's time to keep coming back." He almost asked why she cared. Instead, he looked down at the table, tracing the grain in the wood beneath the varnish. A small notch ran across one corner, as if a pot had been set down too hard. "Things last longer when you look after them," she said, following his eyes. The clock on the far wall ticked softly, each second unhurried. He found himself matching his breathing to it without meaning to. Someone laughed near the sink, a low, warm sound. It rose and fell quickly, like a match being struck and blown out. Alma picked up her mug again, cradling it as if testing its weight. "Silence doesn't scare you as much as you think," she said. He met her eyes. Maybe not here. She nodded once, and the space between them felt just a fraction smaller. Outside the window, a thin strip of sunlight had broken through the clouds, laying a pale rectangle across the opposite wall. The light shifted slightly when the door opened again, a volunteer stepping out into the cold with a bag of trash. Alma drained the last sip from her mug and set it down with a quiet tap. Long silences can be a kind of answer, she said. He thought about that as he sat there, not rushing to leave, letting the quiet hold him a little longer. It was Alma who broke the quiet. Someone should mind the pots tomorrow, she said, her voice low but not tired. He looked at her across the table. Will you be here? If the buses run, she replied, as if that were the only condition that mattered. He pictured her standing at a bus stop in the wind, the hem of her coat brushing against her boots, her hands tucked inside her sleeves for warmth. He thought about the buses not running, what that meant for her, for this place, for the pot on the stove that wouldn't get stirred. What would make it easier, he asked. She didn't hesitate. A place to belong. The words landed like a stone in still water. No rush of explanation, no softening at the edges. They simply dropped, and the ripples moved out on their own. He had been expecting something concrete, a number, a request for funding, a list of repairs. Something he could sign for and be done with, but she said it like she'd already weighted against every other possible answer. What does that mean? He asked. It means knowing you still be missed if you don't show up, she said. And someone will keep a plate for you just in case. His gaze shifted to the counter. A volunteer was ladling soup into bowls for the few late arrivals. The pot was nearly empty, and the volunteer scraped the ladle gently across the bottom to coax out the last pieces. It reminded him of the way Alma's words worked, gathering up what was left and making it count. From the far end of the room, a voice called out, "Bread sep's gone." "I'll get more," he said automatically, pushing his chair back. He went to the shelf and lifted the basket, the cloth lining still faintly warm from the earlier batch. Carrying it back, he set it on the counter where it belonged. The action was simple, but it lodged in his chest like a hook. "You didn't have to do that," Alma said when he returned. "I wanted to," he replied, surprising himself with how easily the truth came. A kettle whistled in the kitchen, sharp against the low hum of conversation. A volunteer hurried to take it off the burner, steam escaping in a quick cloud before fading into the air. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "You step been here a long time. Long enough to see people leave, come back and sometimes stay," she said. "And you? Why stay?" She considered, her fingers lightly tapping the rim of her mug. "Because leaving doesn't make the hunger go away. Not just the kind you feel in your stomach." He thought about that while a man in a heavy coat shuffled past, carrying his tray with careful hands. The man's eyes met his briefly, and he gave a small nod before moving on. It wasn't gratitude exactly, more like acknowledgement, one human to another. "You think I spit here?" he asked. Alma tilted her head slightly. "That depends on whether you be here to help or to be seen helping." The directness in her voice didn't sting. Instead, it made him feel oddly steadier, like she was handing him a truth without fear of how it might land. In his pocket, his phone buzzed once, then again, he didn't take it out. From the corner, the girl in the red coat reappeared, a slice of bread in her hand. She stopped at their table looking at him. "You're still here," she said, almost accusingly. He smiled faintly. "I am." "Good," she said, before darting away again. He watched her go, the quick bob of her hat through the room. The simple approval in her tone stayed with him longer than he expected. Alma finished the last sip of her tea and set the mug down. "So will you come back tomorrow?" He could hear the question under the question, not about the pot or the ladle, but about the weight he'd choose to carry after today. "Yes," he said. The word was quieter than he meant it to be, but it felt solid. She nodded, as if she already known. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The light from the window shifted slightly as the sun dipped behind a passing cloud, and the room seemed to draw in closer. The kettle clicked off again in the background. The smell of tea and stew mingled, warm and familiar. He didn't have a plan yet, not the kind he was used to, no timeline, no projected outcomes, no presentation to justify the decision. All he knew was that he would come back, and that something in him had already started moving toward the idea of belonging. The next morning, he arrived before the doors opened. The air outside was sharp enough to catch in his throat. His breath rose in quick clouds as he waited, hands in the pockets of his coat. A few people stood scattered along the sidewalk, collars turned up, eyes down. Nobody spoke much. The shelter's lights were still dim through the frosted glass, a faint glow in the gray morning. When the door unlocked, Alma was the first thing he saw. She was setting a pot on the front burner, her sleeves already pushed up. Steam curled faintly from the rim. "You stir early," she said, not surprised. "Buses were running," he replied. "You didn't take one," she said, glancing at his coat. He smiled slightly. "No." The room smelled different in the morning. Cleaner, sharper, the stew's base just starting to build. The counters were bare, the ladles hung neatly in their places. There was a quiet hum of readiness, like a stage before the curtain rose. He slipped off his coat, draped it over a chair, and went to the sink without being asked. The water ran cold at first, then warmed quickly as he rinsed vegetables under the stream. Carrots, potatoes, celery, each one catching the light in small glints as it turned in his hands. "You've done this before," Alma said from the stove. "Not lately," he answered. A volunteer came in carrying a box of bread rolls. "A morning," she said, her voice muffled by the scarf still looped around her neck. He greeted her without thinking, the word easy in his mouth. The kitchen filled slowly. More volunteers, the low thud of crates being set down, the rhythmic chop of knives against cutting boards. He fell into the work without checking the clock. At one point, Alma set the ladle in his hand. "Keep stirring," she said. "Don't accept to let it stick at the bottom." The pot was heavy, the stew swirling in slow circles. Steam rose into his face, carrying that mix of pepper, bay, and something sweet beneath it. He felt the heat soak into his skin, the motion of the ladle steadying into a rhythm he didn't have to think about. The door opened again, letting in a draft. He turned just in time to see the boy with the stuffed rabbit shuffle in beside his mother. The toy's ear was patched again, this time with a fresh piece of cloth in a brighter color. The boy caught sight of him at the stove and grinned. "You came back," the boy said. "I said I would," he replied. The boy nodded like that was the most ordinary thing in the world, then went to sit at a table near the window. When the line finally formed, he served bowl after bowl. Some people met his eyes, some didn't. A few offered quiet thanks. One man simply nodded once before moving on. None of it felt like the kind of approval he was used to, but it felt cleaner somehow, untangled from expectation. Halfway through the service, Alma leaned in. "You're smiling," she said quietly. He hadn't yet realized. "Maybe," he said. When the last bowl was served and the room eased into the softer hum of people eating, he stepped aside. Alma was wiping down the counter with her usual slow, steady strokes. "What happens when you're not here?" he asked. "Someone else stirs the pot," she said, "but its step's not the same." He looked down at his hands. The skin around his knuckles was flushed from the heat. "I could help with that," he said. She didn't thank him right away, she just nodded, as though she'd been expecting him to arrive at this point on his own. Later, when the tables had emptied and the dishes were stacked, he slipped into the back office. The shelter director sat behind a small desk, her hands folded over a ledger. She looked up with mild surprise when he stepped inside. "I want to cover the cost of a year's Septa's meals," he said, "and transportation for anyone who needs to get here. No announcements, no press." The director blinked once, then smiled slowly. "That Sep's generous. That Sep's generous. It's Sep's necessary," he said. When he came back out, Alma was putting the last ladle away. "You did something," she said. He shrugged. "Just making sure the pots keep talking." Her eyes softened. "That Sep's not all you did." He didn't answer, but as he put on his coat, the weight in his chest felt lighter, not because he'd given something, but because he'd finally done it without expecting anything in return. As he reached the door, the girl in the red coat came barreling in, cheeks flushed from the cold. She stopped short when she saw him. "You'd still here," she said. "For now," he replied. She grinned, then darted past him toward Alma. He stepped outside into the cold, the air biting at his cheeks. For the first time in a long while, the bite felt welcome. a reminder he was still here, still moving. The drive back to his old street was longer than he remembered. It wasn't far in miles, but the city seemed to change in increments, from glass and steel to brick and siding, from manicured storefronts to faded paint and narrow sidewalks. The air felt different too, softer somehow, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke and damp leaves. He kept the window cracked, letting the cold ride along with him. On the passenger seat sat a heavy pot, wrapped in a clean towel to keep it warm. He'd borrowed it from the shelter's kitchen that morning, filling it with Alma's stew. The street was quieter than it had been in his memory. A few houses leaned slightly toward the road, their porches sagging under the weight of years. Some windows were dark, others flickered with the pale blue of television light. He slowed near the middle, scanning for a number he wasn't even sure was still there. The house that had once been his was smaller than he remembered, the paint on the trim peeling in long strips. The front step, the one that used to stick in winter, was chipped at the corner. He parked by the curb and sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. The pot's warmth radiated faintly into the space between them. When he finally stepped out, the air caught at his throat. The cold here wasn't the same as downtown. It was quieter, carrying the stillness of a place where not much moved after dark. He walked up the path, the gravel crunching under his shoes. The porch boards gave a familiar creak under his weight. He knocked. It took a few moments for the door to open. An older man with a thin frame and a wary expression appeared, peering out through the small gap the chain allowed. "Can I help you?" the man asked. "I used to live here," the CEO said. "A long time ago, I brought something." He lifted the pot slightly. The man's eyes narrowed in curiosity. After a beat, the chain slid free, and the door opened wider. Warm air, tinged with the scent of dust and laundry soap, drifted out. Inside, the hallway was narrow, the wallpaper faded in places where pictures had once hung. The man stepped back, gesturing toward the small kitchen at the end. He set the pot on the table. The steam escaped as he loosened the towel, carrying the familiar blend of pepper, bay leaf, and slow-cooked beef into the room. "My wife Seps, just in the back," the man said, calling over his shoulder. "Marcy, you shall want to see this." Footsteps approached, slower than he expected, but steady. A woman appeared in the doorway, her hair pulled back in a loose knot, eyes sharp even under the weight of years. "This is him," the man said simply. The woman studied him for a moment, her gaze moving from his face to the pot, then back again. "I thought you moved far away," she said. "I did," he admitted. "But I came back today." Her eyes softened a fraction. "You brought food?" He nodded. It's Sips, Alma. Sips, stew. She taught me how to make it." At the mention of Alma Sips' name, the woman Sips' mouth curved into a small smile. "Still feeding people, is she?" "She is," he said. "Every day." The woman fetched 3 bowls from a cupboard, the edges worn smooth. She set them on the table without asking if he wanted any, just filled them each in turn, the ladle dipping deep into the pot. They ate mostly in silence. The stew tasted the same as it had in the shelter, warm, patient, with that quiet sweetness that lingered at the end. But here in this small kitchen with its low ceiling and humming fridge, it carried something else, the shape of a place where meals had been shared without ceremony. Halfway through, the woman set her spoon down. "Alma used to bring this over on Sundays," she said. "Even when your mother said she didn't need help." He nodded. The spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "She remembers." "She would," the woman said. A muffled laugh floated in from outside, children playing somewhere down the block, their voices high and quick. He turned toward the sound, catching a glimpse through the window of 2 kids chasing each other under the yellow glow of a street lamp. Something in his chest loosened. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd heard that kind of laughter, without it being planned for a commercial, or staged for a fundraiser. When the bowls were empty, he helped carry them to the sink. The woman waved off his offer to wash up, so he stood for a moment, leaning lightly against the counter, watching her rinse each one under the warm tap. "You staying long?" she asked, without looking at him. "I'm not sure," he said honestly, "but I be back." She glanced over her shoulder, a small nod serving as her answer. As he put his coat back on, the man walked him to the door. The night air was colder now, the kind that settled deep into your sleeves if you stood still too long. Before stepping out, he looked back into the narrow hallway. The light from the kitchen cast a warm rectangle on the floor, just far enough to reach the edge of the rug. "Thank you for letting me in," he said. The man gave a simple shrug. "You brought stew." On the porch, he paused. The houses along the street were quiet, their windows glowing faintly against the dark. The sound of the children's laughter had faded, replaced by the low hum of a distant car engine. He walked back to his car, the gravel crunching underfoot again. As he reached for the door handle, he glanced down the street toward the corner where the bus stop still stood. The same rusted pole, the same tilted bench. He pictured Alma there, her hands in her sleeves, waiting for a ride in the cold. He made a mental note. No, not mental, a promise. Sliding into the driver's seat, he started the engine. The headlights swept briefly across the front step as he pulled away, catching the chipped corner just for a second before it disappeared in the rearview mirror. The road ahead was quiet, and for the first time in years, so was he.